The man who built an empire was now being pushed through a quiet hospital corridor with a thin blanket pulled up to his chest. Damon Gibson lay still on the gurney, staring at a ceiling he could not command, surrounded by machines that did not care who he was. His name had once silenced rooms. Today, it appeared only on a plastic wristband. Each breath came shallow, forced. His heart, the same one that once powered relentless ambition, struggled to keep its rhythm. He had signed billion-dollar deals without hesitation, fired executives with a sentence, reshaped industries with a nod. Yet now his hands trembled against the sheet, fingers curling not with authority, but fear. This wasn't a shareholder meeting. This wasn't a negotiation. This was the moment where wealth offered no leverage. A nurse walked alongside him, her voice calm, professional, detached in the way only experience could make it. She checked his chart without meeting his eyes, as if he were any other patient, because to her he was. Then she spoke. "Mr. Gibson, your lead surgeon will be Dr. Candace Fadell." The gurney stopped moving, not because anyone ordered it to, but because Damon's body refused to process what his ears had just heard. That name didn't ring. It didn't echo. It struck. Candace. His throat tightened. His mind raced ahead, then slammed backward, flooded with memories he had buried under years of profit reports and global expansion. There was no confusion, no question about who she was. He knew instantly. He had hoped, foolishly, that he'd never hear that name again. The nurse continued speaking, unaware she had just split his world open. "She'll be leading the procedure personally." Damon swallowed hard. There were moments in life when the past didn't knock. It waited until you were on your knees, and then stood directly in front of you. Have you ever spent years avoiding one truth, only to meet it again when you were weakest? Damon had told himself he made choices from logic, not emotion. He had convinced himself that walking away was necessary, justified, even noble. But lying there, heart failing, strength gone, stripped of every title that once shielded him, those thoughts returned uninvited. There was Candace's quiet voice late at night, the side of the bed that stayed cold long after she left, the hesitation he never explained. He had run from responsibility dressed as ambition, and now it had found him. He wanted to refuse, wanted to demand another surgeon, another option, another delay. But for the first time in decades, there were no alternatives he could buy. If he lived, it would be by her hands. The corridor lights overhead blurred as they rolled forward again, but Damon barely noticed. His focus collapsed inward, anchored to a single realization. The balance had shifted, cut now to another room, clean, bright, controlled. Candace Fadell stood at the sink, scrubbing her hands with methodical precision. Her expression was steady, her breathing even. She didn't rush, she didn't pause. This was not emotion time, this was work. Around her, staff moved with purpose, deferring to her instructions without question. Every nod, every response reflected trust earned through skill, not history. To them, she wasn't a memory. She was authority. Candace slipped on her gloves smoothly, eyes lifting for only a moment as she received the final chart. Damon Gibson. She absorbed the name without reaction. No anger crossed her face, no tenderness softened her resolve. Whatever history once existed belonged to another life. The woman standing here now had built something solid from the ground up, not with inheritance, not with privilege, but with discipline and sacrifice. Years earlier, Damon had walked away believing she could not give him a future. He never imagined she would become one. As she turned toward the operating room, the truth settled heavily between their separate spaces. Damon Gibson divorced the only woman who ever loved him without conditions, and now the future of his heart rested in her hands. You see, this story isn't about sudden coincidence or convenient timing. It's about consequence. It's about what happens when control is mistaken for purpose, and when pride costs more than anyone expects. Damon lay waiting, powerless in a way he had never allowed himself to feel. Candace stood prepared, grounded in the strength she had forged alone. What Damon did not yet understand, what the walls of that hospital had not yet revealed, was that Candace's life didn't pause after the divorce. It expanded, and waiting just beyond those doors were truths that would force him to confront everything he thought he knew about legacy, love, and worth. So let me ask you something important, family. Before we go any further, welcome back to Mr. Williams' Story Time. And to every new listener, I'm grateful you're here tonight. If stories that carry meaning, healing, and life lessons matter to you, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs encouragement. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you never miss what this family creates together. Your support helps this space grow, and it truly means more than you know. As you stay with me through this journey, keep one question close to your heart. What does it really cost to walk away from the people who love us most? This story begins not with success, but with the moment success could no longer protect him. And this is only the beginning. Before suits and shareholders, before headlines learned his name, Damon Gibson was a young man standing in borrowed confidence. He lived in a small apartment with thin walls and unreliable heat. The furniture didn't match, and most of it had been collected secondhand, but he treated that space like a headquarters. Notes were taped everywhere, on the fridge, beside the bathroom mirror, even above the light switch. Ideas lived there, plans, dreams that hadn't yet learned how often they would be rejected. Damon woke early and stayed up late, driven by a hunger that never seemed satisfied. He read business articles like scripture and studied market patterns the way some people studied faith. But beneath that focus lived insecurity, the kind that whispered questions at night. What if I'm not enough? What if this never works? He didn't share those thoughts out loud. Instead, he disguised them as ambition. That was the version of demon Candace Fadel met. Not powerful, not certain, but intensely alive with possibility. Candace entered his life quietly. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She laughed easily, listened without interrupting, and noticed things other people skipped over. They met through a mutual friend, a casual introduction that Damon almost ignored because his mind was elsewhere. But Candace stayed. She remembered his ideas when others forgot them. She asked follow-up questions. She showed up with curiosity instead of judgment. Where Damon pushed himself forward, Candace anchored him in place. She worked long hours too, splitting her time between research labs and study groups, yet she always made room for encouragement. If Damon spiraled into doubt, Candace met him with steadiness. "You don't need to rush greatness," she told him once. "You just need to keep moving." He didn't realize it then, but she had already begun carrying the weight he pretended not to feel. Their nights became a rhythm. Damon sat at the table with his laptop open, reviewing another rejection email, shoulders tense. Candace moved through the kitchen without urgency, stirring soup, music playing softly from her phone. Steam filled the air, warm and comforting. "Another no?" she asked gently. He nodded, jaw tight. Instead of offering advice, Candace placed a bowl in front of him and rested a hand on his shoulder. No speeches, no corrections, just presence. Sometimes they laughed at how serious he took himself. Sometimes they read aloud, from books neither fully understood yet. Other nights passed in quiet companionship, comfortable and unforced. Failure showed up often back then. So did hope. Candace made space for both. There was humor between them, light, unguarded moments that made the future feel less heavy. Damon would rehearse investor pitches in the mirror, only to catch Candace mimicking his gestures behind him. She teased his intensity, reminding him to breathe, reminding him he was more than the ideas he chased. "You're allowed to rest," she said one evening, taking the laptop from his hands and setting it aside. He smiled at the word empires back then, not realizing how prophetic it would become. What Damon felt with Candace wasn't adrenaline, it was safety. And for someone who built his life on pushing forward, that safety felt rare and valuable. He trusted her before he trusted success. They married quietly, no cameras, no crowd, just a small room, a few witnesses, and vows whispered without performance. Candace wore a simple dress. Damon's suit didn't quite fit right, but Candace said it didn't matter. They held hands the entire time. In that moment, Damon believed nothing could separate ambition from love, that success would simply wrap itself around what they already had. Candace believed in the man he was, not the one he might become. As they stepped outside afterward, Candace rested her head against his shoulder. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "we're building this together." Damon believed her, and without realizing it, he leaned fully into that belief, trusting her strength, her balance, her faith, long before the world ever trusted him. She believed in him long before the world did. Success did not arrive all at once, It crept in quietly, almost politely, before it learned how to demand everything. At first, it was a single breakthrough, a meeting that went better than expected, a proposal that finally earned more curiosity than dismissal. Demond came home energized, words tumbling over each other as he explained new possibilities. Candace listened the same way she always had, eyes attentive, smile genuine. "I told you," she said, squeezing his hand. "You just needed time." Demand laughed, relief flooding his chest. For the first time, the future didn't feel imaginary. It felt close enough to touch, and in those early days, success still made room for love. It showed up like a guest, not yet a permanent occupant. They celebrated with takeout eaten on the couch, shoes kicked off, laughter easy. Candace framed the first signed contract and placed it on the wall beside his handwritten notes. Not as a trophy, but as proof. "You'll want to remember this version of yourself," she told him. "The one who didn't quit." Demon nodded, unaware that memory would one day feel distant. As Gibson Global began to take shape, Demon's confidence sharpened. So did his fear of losing momentum. He pushed harder, stretched conversations thinner, chased opportunities Candace couldn't always follow. Late nights grew later, weekends blurred into workdays. Candace adjusted without complaint, sliding dinner into the oven later, staying awake just to hear him come through the door. "We'll celebrate properly next time," he said more than once, loosening his tie with distracted affection. Candace smiled, meaning it every time she said, "I'll be here." Even as Demond's world expanded, Candace's remained centered on him. She learned his schedules, better than he remembered them himself. She prepared meals he forgot to eat. She softened the edges of disappointment when meetings fell through and grounded him when deals nearly consumed him. She never asked him to choose, but choice has a way of revealing itself anyway. One evening, Candace waited with 2 plates on the table, candles already lit. The food cooled, the room quieted, hours passed. When Demond finally arrived, his phone still in his hand, the apology came quickly, practiced, rushed, unfinished. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't accuse, she simply said, "I missed you today." Demond paused, confused by the simplicity of it. "I'm doing this for us," he replied, meaning it. She nodded, believing him, even as something subtle shifted. Time moved forward, and the space between intention and impact widened. Candace continued her own studies, balancing lab work with the life they were building. She spoke often about the future, about children, about a home filled with warmth and safety rather than schedules. Damon listened, but his answers grew measured. "Once things stabilize," he said, "once the company is secure." Candace accepted those answers at face value. She trusted his promise the way she trusted his love, without bargaining. But pressure has a way of sneaking into rooms quietly. Friends began asking questions. Family conversations lingered a little too long on legacy, on continuance, on what came next. Demon brushed those comments aside publicly, yet privately, they planted thoughts he hadn't prepared for. What if everything he built depended on more than just him? Candace noticed the weight settling on his shoulders. She noticed how he sometimes stared past her, already calculating tomorrow. She met that distance not with resentment but patience. "You're not late because you don't care," she reminded him one night. "You're just afraid of stopping." He didn't answer. He didn't disagree either. There were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, when Demond almost said it out loud, almost admitted how overwhelmed he felt, how the responsibility scared him more than the failures ever had. But Candace already carried him enough. He told himself she didn't need to know everything. That belief would cost them both. Their love didn't collapse. It thinned. Small silences replaced conversations. Plans shifted without discussion. Candace learned to read his exhaustion and step aside, even when she needed closeness most. Yet through it all, she remained steady. She spoke encouragement into his doubt. She defended his absence in rooms he couldn't attend. She believed fiercely, even when belief required patience that went unseen. And Demond, consumed by the momentum he chased, never noticed how rare that kind of belief truly was. Not yet, because long before the world lined up behind him, before investors trusted his vision, before success made his name valuable, Candace had already chosen him. A second meeting followed the first, then a third. Emails that once began with "unfortunately" started opening with "we're intrigued." Demond still worked from the same desk, still slept too little, but something inside him changed. His posture straightened, his voice carried more certainty. Candace noticed immediately. She celebrated without hesitation, clapping when he landed his first serious investor call, hugging him as though the achievement belonged to both of them. And in truth, it did. Every step forward carried her fingerprints. Encouragement spoken at the right time, patience offered when doubts set in. Success was still close enough to feel shared. As Gibson Global began forming its true foundation, time became Demond's most valuable currency, and the one he spent most recklessly. Morning meetings bled into afternoons, afternoons swallowed evenings. Candace adjusted instinctively, shifting her routines, pushing her exhaustion aside so she could still meet him where he was. Dinner warmed twice before being eaten. Conversations picked up mid-thought and ended unfinished. Demond apologized often, sincerely, but briefly. "This phase won't last forever," he promised. Candace believed him. She had no reason not to. Love to her meant endurance. Pressure entered quietly, trailing expectation behind it. Investors asked about vision. Mentors asked about longevity. Industry connections spoke about stability, not just profit, but permanence. Demond began measuring success not only by growth, but by how secure it looked to others. At social gatherings, questions surfaced more frequently. Demond laughed them off in public. Alone, those words stayed with him. He wasn't just building a company anymore. He was being measured against the idea of legacy. Candace, watching from the edge, sensed the shift, not the words, but the weight behind them. At home, Candace tried to keep their world grounded. She spoke about simple things, vacations they never took, traditions they might create, a future that felt human rather than impressive. She talked about children carefully, not with pressure, but hope. Demond listened while checking messages. "Not now," he said gently. "Things are moving fast." Candace nodded, as she always did, choosing trust over fear. But even patience has dimensions, and hers was stretching. The company grew, so did the distance. Demond no longer noticed when Candace stopped waiting awake. He missed small changes, her silence replacing questions, her encouragement becoming shorter, quieter. She still believed in him, still defended his absence, still told herself love required flexibility. What Candace did not realize was that love was starting to bend under the weight of expectation, not breaking yet, but no longer balanced. And Demond, focused on holding everything together, mistook her strength for immunity. He had no idea how close they were to a crossroads neither of them had planned for. Candace learned to live between moments. She learned how to measure Demond's days by the sound of his keys at the door, how to tell whether he was present by the way he looked at her when she spoke. Some nights his eyes softened when they met. Other nights they passed over her as if she were part of the room, rather than the reason it once felt like home. Still, she adjusted. She delayed her own milestones. She postponed difficult conversations. She told herself there would be a better time. After the next deal, the next expansion, the next proof that his effort was worth the sacrifice. In her mind, love meant patience, and patience, she believed, would be rewarded. Demond, meanwhile, felt the weight tighten around him. Expectations grew louder. Advisors spoke more boldly. The company was no longer fragile, it was visible, scrutinized, watched, and with that attention came assumptions about what a man in his position should already have secured. "He needs stability," one associate remarked casually. "Investors like knowing the future's organized." Demond nodded without responding, though the words followed him home. Stability began to sound like something external, something measurable, something that could be verified to others. That night, Candace mentioned a colleague moving into a larger space, starting a family. She didn't state it as comparison. It slipped into the conversation naturally, a thought spoken aloud. Demond's jaw tightened. "We'll talk about that later," he said, more sharply than he intended. Candace paused, studied his face, then softened. "Of course," she replied. "Whenever you're ready." But readiness, Demond realized, was becoming a moving target. The doctor visits started quietly. At first, they were casual checkups, framed as routine. Candace approached them with calm curiosity, not fear. She trusted her body. She trusted time. Demond attended the first appointment distracted, His mind split between test results and incoming messages. He didn't mean to seem distant. He just didn't know how to hold both worlds at once. When the conversations turned more technical, more cautious, something inside him recoiled. "I don't understand," he said afterward, trying to make sense of probabilities and margins. Candace reached for his hand. "Neither do I," she answered honestly. "But we'll learn." Weeks passed, then months. Answers arrived slowly, each one demanding restraint rather than certainty. Candace absorbed them quietly, processing privately before sharing what little clarity she could offer. Demand heard delay where Candace heard patience. At events, questions sharpened. "So, no little Gibsons yet?" "Temporary, I'm sure." He laughed along, but resentment bloomed beneath the surface, not toward Candace directly, but toward the uncertainty he couldn't control. One evening, long after midnight, the pressure finally found words. "I don't know how long I can keep explaining this," Damon said, pacing the living room, tie loosened, voice strained. "Everyone expects something." Candace stood still, listening carefully. "What do you expect?" she asked. The question landed heavier than he anticipated. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The answer wasn't simple anymore. What Damon didn't say, what he couldn't yet articulate, was that fear had started making his decisions for him. Fear of building everything, only to watch it questioned. Fear of failing expectations he never agreed to but now carried anyway. Candace saw the conflict even when he didn't express it. She saw love war with ambition. She saw a man pulling away not because he wanted to leave, but because he didn't know how to stay without losing himself. That night she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling space where closeness once lived. She still believed in him, but belief, she was learning, could not replace presence. And somewhere between unanswered questions and unspoken fears, the foundation they built together began to shift, quietly, profoundly, toward a moment neither of them was ready to face. Damon stopped sleeping through the night. Even when exhaustion claimed him, his rest was shallow. Thoughts chased him into the dark, projections, timelines, conversations he replayed again and again without resolution. The company no longer felt fragile, but it felt exposed. Every move mattered, every perception carried weight, and somewhere along the way, Damon began tying those expectations to Candace without realizing it. He watched her more closely, not with suspicion, but with a quiet measuring he tried to ignore. He noticed how carefully she chose her words now, how often she reassured him before he asked, how she absorbed disappointment without complaint. Her calm, once comforting, began to unsettle him. He told himself it was stress, that once things stabilized, everything else would follow. One afternoon, Candace invited him to one more appointment. She didn't explain much, she never did. She simply asked if he could come. Damon agreed, reluctantly. He left halfway through a conference call, irritation simmering beneath his composure. The waiting room was quiet. Candace sat beside him, hands folded, eyes steady. When the specialist spoke, the words were gentle. "Careful, framed to protect. Pregnancy may be extremely difficult," the doctor said. "Not impossible, but unlikely without significant intervention." Candace nodded slowly, absorbing the moment with practiced restraint. Damon felt something cold settle in his chest. He asked questions, clinical ones, detached ones. He wanted certainty where there was none. When answers came wrapped in caution instead of clarity, frustration rose. On the drive home, silence filled the car. Candace finally spoke first. "I don't want this to define us." Damon said nothing. He wanted to agree, he truly did, but outside voices echoed louder now than her quiet hope. Investors, advisors, friends who spoke freely about continuation and inheritance as though those ideas lived on spreadsheets. At a dinner event weeks later, someone laughed and said, "Well, all that success needs somewhere to land someday." The comment wasn't malicious, it wasn't direct, but Damon felt every word sharpen into pressure. He glanced at Candace across the table. She smiled politely, unaware that the distance he felt wasn't physical, it was internal. That night, the argument didn't explode. It emerged slowly, painfully. "I carry all of this," Damon said, voice tense but restrained. "The company, the employees, the future. It all depends on what I build." Candace listened. "And what about us?" she asked quietly. Demond hesitated. Candace's expression shifted just slightly, enough to reveal hurt she hadn't yet allowed herself to feel fully. "I thought we were the foundation," she said. He looked away. The days that followed were marked by politeness, kindness stripped of warmth. They moved around each other carefully, as though both understood something fragile had cracked beneath their feet. Demon told himself he needed space to think. Candace told herself space could heal what pressure had strained. But time, instead of softening the divide, clarified it. One morning, Demond placed divorce papers on the counter, not aggressively, not dramatically, almost apologetically. Candace read them without crying. The headlines would come later, the judgments would follow, but in that moment all that mattered was the truth neither of them could undo. He walked away believing love could be replaced with certainty. And she let him go with dignity, refusing to beg for a place she once held effortlessly. Candace left with her head held high and a heart carrying quiet grief. Demond stood alone in the apartment that once felt like a dream in motion, and neither of them knew yet that life had only begun revealing its consequences. Candace didn't stop moving forward after she left. She packed her life into quiet boxes, choosing what to carry and what to release. The apartment no longer echoed with shared dreams, yet she refused to let the emptiness define her. She took a smaller place closer to her work, one filled with light and simplicity, and returned to routines that belonged solely to her. Grief arrived in waves, not all at once. Some days passed with manageable calm. Others caught her unaware, a familiar song, an empty chair, a memory she hadn't planned to revisit. She let herself feel it. Then she stood back up. Work became refuge. Research demanded precision and attention, leaving little room for regret. Candace immersed herself in long hours, not to escape pain, but to honor the part of herself that had always found purpose in helping others heal. Weeks blurred into months. Her body told its own story before words did. Fatigue settled deeper than usual. Dizziness interrupted her mornings. When she finally collapsed mid-shift, colleagues insisted she get checked, refusing to accept her reassurances. The diagnosis arrived quietly. "You're pregnant," the doctor said. Candace laughed, not from disbelief, but shock layered with disbelief's twin. "That's not possible," she replied softly. Tests confirmed it, then confirmed it again. Triplets. The room felt suddenly too still, as if the air itself paused to respect what had been spoken. Candace pressed a hand to her stomach, tears blurring her vision. Life had not ended the moment her marriage did. It had multiplied. She didn't call Demon, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because this chapter was hers alone. She chose privacy over explanation, peace over reopening wounds that were still healing. She whispered promises to the lives growing within her, promises rooted in protection, not expectation. "I'll show you who you are before the world tries to decide for you," she told them. Pregnancy did not slow her ambition. If anything, it sharpened it. Candace returned to her studies with renewed determination, preparing for a life that would soon demand more than just brilliance. It would require resilience. She studied while her body changed. She learned to balance exhaustion with resolve, fear with hope. When the children were born, the room filled not with applause but awe. Camila arrived first, calm and observant. Harper followed, curious even in silence. Kai came last, small hands already reaching. Candace held them all, heart overwhelmed yet steady. She had once been told her future was uncertain. Now it lay breathing against her chest. Years passed. Candace became known not for who she once loved, but for who she was becoming. Her skill sharpened, her reputation grew. Parents trusted her, patients remembered her calm. She healed hearts daily, practiced precision guided by compassion. And every night, she returned home to 3 voices calling her name. Demond Gibson became a name she rarely allowed herself to think about, not because the memory hurt too much, but because it no longer defined her. Some stories don't end when love does. Some begin there. Demond Gibson reached the height he once chased relentlessly. Gibson Global expanded across markets, its name synonymous with precision and power. Boardrooms welcomed him with respect sharpened by expectation. Magazine profiles praised his discipline. Analysts spoke about his instincts as if they were innate, not earned. To the outside world, Damon's life appeared complete. Privately, time slowed. The apartment he moved into after the divorce was larger, more refined, yet quieter than anything he remembered. Success filled his calendar but avoided the spaces that waited for meaning. He told himself this was the cost of progress, that solitude was temporary, that fulfillment would eventually catch up. It didn't. Fatigue crept in gradually. It announced itself as stress, then pressure, then something harder to dismiss. Chest tightness during meetings. Breathlessness, walking short distances. Nights punctured by wakefulness that no meditation or strategy could resolve. His doctor insisted on tests. The results changed everything. Advanced heart failure, the specialist said carefully. You've pushed too hard, for too long. Damon sat still, absorbing words that didn't bend to his will. This wasn't a challenge to overcome. It was a condition to survive. Surgery was necessary, soon. For the first time since founding his empire, Damon delegated without argument. His assistants noticed the change in his tone. Less command, more urgency restrained by fear. The day he was admitted, the hospital smelled clean and uninvolved. It treated him like anyone else. When his assistant returned with updates, she spoke plainly. Your procedure will be performed by Dr. Candace Fidel. Damon's heartbeat faltered. No, he said quietly, not in anger, in disbelief. Damon closed his eyes. The past had found him again, not in a memory, but in motion. Candace entered the hospital that morning with purpose, her mind focused on the procedure ahead, not the patient's name. She had learned long ago that preparation required precision, not distraction. Only when she received the final file did she pause. Damon Gibson. Her breath slowed, then steadied. She did not step back. She did not request reassignment. She continued forward. Professional distance guided her steps, built from years of responsibility that demanded clarity over sentiment. She washed her hands thoroughly, letting routine ground her. Whatever once existed belonged to another life. When she approached Damon's room, she knocked once before entering. Their eyes met. Time did not rush into the space between them. It simply recognized itself. Mr. Gibson, Candace said evenly, I'll be leading your surgery. His voice felt foreign in his chest. I never stopped thinking about you. She held his gaze without flinching. I never stopped becoming... He searched her face for familiarity, for warmth, for traces of the woman he remembered. What he found instead was something stronger, confidence shaped by lived experience. As she explained the procedure, her tone stayed measured, calm, precise. He listened closely, not as a CEO, but as a man face to face with consequence. Outside the room, 3 young voices echoed down the hall. Their laughter stopped near the door. Candace glanced briefly toward the sound, then back at Damon. He noticed the shift, subtle but unmistakable. Your children? He asked, unsure why the question felt urgent. She nodded once. They're waiting for me. Something in his expression changed. Recognition stirred where denial had lived. Are they? His voice cracked. He did not finish. Candace held the pause longer than necessary, then answered, yes. The truth settled hard and final. Damon lowered his head, hands pressing against the blankets as realization overtook regret. I left you because I thought you couldn't give me a future, he said hoarsely. But you became one. Candace did not correct him. She had learned healing did not require winning old arguments. The operating room doors opened. As Damon was prepared for surgery, Candace stood ready, not as his past, but as his present reality. 3 children pressed their hands lightly against the glass outside, watching with quiet familiarity. A family once broken stood on the edge of something new, not formed by control but by growth, humility, and truth, and in the space between heartbeats, life prepared to offer its final lesson. Damon's recovery forced him into stillness, the kind that stripped excuses bare. Days blurred into careful checkups and quiet mornings, where time no longer bent to his will. The empire continued without him, algorithms humming, executives stepping in seamlessly. For the first time, Damon realized how much he had tied his identity to motion. Now, lying back against pillows as machines tracked his progress, he had nothing to measure himself by except thought. Candace visited once each day, never hurried, never lingering longer than appropriate, She checked his vitals, reviewed charts, explained progress with the same clarity she gave every patient. No softness designed to soothe guilt. No sharpness meant to punish regret. Just professionalism. Firm, fair, complete. During one visit, Damon finally said what he'd rehearsed in silence. "I thought legacy meant control," he admitted, staring at his hands. "That if I built enough, planned far enough ahead, nothing could fall apart." Candace adjusted the forge rip before answering. "And did it work?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "I confused ambition with love." She met his gaze then, not as a surgeon, not as a past wife, but as a woman who had earned her ground. "And I learned," she said, "that walking away wasn't failure, it was survival." Her words didn't sting. They clarified. Over the next days, Demond met Camila, Harper, and Kai properly. Not as symbols, not as proof of irony, as children. Camila observed him thoughtfully, rarely speaking without purpose. Harper asked questions endlessly, curious about everything from heart monitors to hospital food. Kai approached last, studying Demond with a seriousness far older than his years. "You look tired," Kai said simply. Damon smiled for the first time without effort. "I am," Kai nodded, satisfied. There was no dramatic forgiveness, no rush to closeness. Trust rebuilt itself in quiet exchanges. Shared walks in the hospital garden, conversations about school projects, Candace watching carefully without interference. Damon apologized once, completely, without justification. Candace accepted it without reopening wounds. Healing continued, not as reunion but respect rediscovered. One evening, as sunset filtered through the window, Candace stood to leave. "Thank you," Damon said, "for saving my life." She paused at the door. "That was my job." Then she turned back. "But choosing to change," she added, "that's yours." The children waited down the hall, laughter trailing ahead of them. Demond watched as Candace joined them, her presence effortless, her strength unquestioned. For the first time, he understood. Legacy wasn't continuity of name. It was continuity of care. And as his heart steadied, scarred but alive, Demond accepted the truth he once avoided. The heart can heal, but only when pride steps aside. Demond was discharged on a quiet morning. There were no reporters waiting, no announcements made, just paperwork signed, instructions given, and a slow walk toward an exit he had entered months earlier, as a man certain nothing could break him. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, honest. Candace waited with the children a short distance away, giving Damon space to steady himself. He noticed how naturally they stood together, not arranged, not posed, just real. Camila waved politely. Kai stayed close to Candace's side, watchful as ever. Demon bent slightly, careful not to push himself. "Thank you for coming," he said. Candace nodded. "We talked about it. It felt right." That simple sentence carried more grace than anything he deserved. And yet, it was exactly what he needed. Life did not reset overnight. Demon did not return to the throne he once occupied. He stepped back deliberately, choosing presence over dominance, listening more than directing. Decisions felt slower now, but clearer. The noise that once drove him had lost its authority. Candace never asked for assurances. She never demanded apologies beyond the one already given. What mattered to her was consistency, shown, not spoken. Some evenings, Demon joined them for dinner. Other nights, he left early, respecting the rhythm Candace had already established. Trust wasn't rushed. It was rebuilt thoughtfully. One night, Harper asked, "Are you staying forever?" The question stunned the room into silence. Demon looked at Candace first. She answered gently, "That's something grown-ups decide with time." Demon nodded. "But I'm grateful for right now." And for the first time, that answer was enough. Years earlier, Demond had believed success could protect him from loss, that control would guarantee peace. Now he understood something far truer. A woman's worth is not defined by what she can produce. Ambition without empathy corrodes love. Sometimes love must end for growth to begin. Healing doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. True connection requires equality, not expectation. Candace didn't return because he needed her. She returned because she chose to, from strength, not sacrifice. And Demond learned that the future he feared losing had never required domination, only humility, family. If this story stirred something inside you, take a moment to reflect on it. Who have you placed expectations on instead of understanding? What truth have you avoided, believing success could replace it? If this message reached you, please like this story, share it with someone who needs it, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Williams Storytime so you never miss a moment that speaks to growth, love, and real-life lessons. Because some stories entertain, but the ones worth keeping teach us how to live. Time passed quietly after that, not in sweeping gestures or dramatic turns, but in ordinary moments that carried new weight. Damon learned how to listen without preparing a response. He learned that presence did not require explanation, it required attention. Some afternoons he sat with Camila as she practiced patience, lining up her thoughts carefully before speaking. Other days he helped Harper with school projects that drifted wildly off topic, laughing more than correcting. Kai asked fewer questions, but watched everything. And Damon learned that trust, once broken, returned through consistency rather than promises. Candace observed it all without interference. She continued her work, her days grounded in responsibility and purpose. She did not rearrange her life to accommodate Damon. Instead, she allowed space for him to meet her where she stood. Equality was no longer a discussion. It was the standard. One evening, as they walked together without destination, Damon spoke honestly. "I used to believe love was something you fit into success," he said. "Now I see it's something you build alongside it, or not at all." Candace nodded, neither agreeing nor denying. She had already lived that truth. Their story did not wrap itself in perfection. It settled into something far more real. Mutual respect, chosen effort, earned closeness. Whatever the future held would grow from intention, not fear. And in that quiet balance, Damon finally understood. You don't measure a life by what you leave behind. You measure it by who is willing to walk forward with you, freely. Family, thank you for staying to the end of this journey. If this story reminded you that growth is possible, that humility can rewrite futures, or that love deserves responsibility, carry that lesson with you. Support the stories that matter, share them, talk about them, and stay connected. Because when we choose understanding over pride, we don't just change stories, we change lives.